Thank you. Sanim, I'm very glad that it's actually the first time I can directly talk to you, although I have been following your talks and the meditation sessions for several years so far. And this question is kind of sudden one, so sorry about that. The thing is, I'm from Russia initially. And in Russia, I protested against the war because I think that this war is absolutely unjust and terrible thing to do. And because of that reason, I had to run away, of course, because I can get 15 years in prison for that. And somehow, I feel that, I don't know, I kind of cannot explain every person I meet that, I'm actually against the war, and I feel ashamed of saying that I'm Russian, actually. And sometimes it's even dangerous to say that. Before it just happened that my life kind of collapsed every 3 years, and I had to change country of residence, and I had to lose everything I had and start everything from the very beginning somewhere else, totally new. Just like after a nuclear explosion, and it happened every 3 years, and now it just happens more often. It's kind of the 11th life I'm trying to start, and since it keeps kind of being ruined over again and over again completely, and now I live in Korea without anything, basically trying to start something again, I don't know, without any connections and anything. I just feel like, I don't know, I'm in a black hole, surrounded by some meaningless pieces. And also I know that I have to start something, to do something and start living again. I don't know how to do that because nothing makes any sense anymore. I don't know. And the meditation is also difficult because maybe I started doubting myself. And maybe because I have this sort of panic fits when I start meditating also. And I have this feeling that I have to run away somewhere again. Also, maybe I don't have to. And I don't know, everything is so unstable. And sorry, I know it's kind of, it's a messy question, but the second part is, or the question addresses the terms of impermanence. Now I can kind of directly experience the total impermanence of everything, and kind of I expect it in a very severe, extreme ways, I would say. But on the other hand, I have this idea that maybe some sort of permanence still exists. For example, if a mother loses a child, if your child dies, it's kind of permanent, right? It cannot be reversed. So this particular mother will never have her child alive again, ever, never. A person who loses his mother, for example, it's a permanent loss, right? You will never have this mother as a mother again, maybe some next life or whatever, I don't know. But this particular person will never be your mother again. So probably some certain things are, nevertheless, they seem to be permanent, right? So that's the second part of the question. And the first part, just since it was so messy, is just how to, in such situation, how to find internal peace, how to find motivation to live on, how to find ways just to start doing something, although you can never be sure that maybe 6 months later life will sustain a nuclear explosion again and you'll be left with nothing somewhere, being unable and not knowing what to do. Thank you.
네. 러시아인 중에도 이렇게 고뇌하는 사람이 있다는 것을 우리가 알게 되었습니다.
So we all have seen how you as a Russian are so conflicted about the current situation.
당신 한 사람이 이렇게 고뇌함으로 해서 많은 사람들 가슴 속에 있는 러시아를 미워하는 게 러시아 사람을 미워하는 오해를 좀 불식시킬 수 있지 않나 생각합니다.
And by witnessing a Russian conflicted over such current situation, I think a lot of people can draw a lesson and realize, that Russia is not the Russian people.
지금 러시아라고 하는 국가 또는 정부가 잘못한 거지 러시아 국민들이 다 잘못한 건 아니에요.
So it's the Russian government that are engaging in this war, not the Russian people.
지금 질문자는 이런 지금 편집증, 이렇게 착각에 빠져 있습니다.
So in that sense, I think you are conflicted. You are kind of mistaken about your identity here.
자신과 러시아라는 국가를 동일시한다는 거예요.
Because you are kind of identifying yourself as an individual Russian citizen with the state of Russia.
그렇기 때문에 심각한 죄책감이 드는 거예요.
And that leads to a severe form of guilt.
이것이 반대 현상으로 나타날 수도 있습니다.
And this can manifest in an opposite way.
러시아 사람의 일부는 러시아 국가와 자기를 동일시해서 러시아를 위해서 목숨을 걸고 싸우는 사람도 심리적으로는 동일합니다.
So there are Russians, who have identified themselves with the state of Russia, with the nation of Russia, and is willing to sacrifice their lives on behalf of the state.
질문자는 러시아를 이루고 있는 1억 명 이상의 사람 중에 한 사람이지, 그러니까 일부분이지 본인이 곧 러시아라는 정부는 아닙니다.
However, you are not Russia. You are just one of over 100 million Russians living in Russia.
그렇기 때문에 러시아 정부의 잘못을 자기가 온전히 다 껴안는 그런 죄책감을 가지지 않아도 됩니다.
So you don't have to embrace what Russia and the state Russia has done and feel guilty about it.
그리고 두 번째는 이런 문제는 러시아인님만 처음 겪는 게 아니라 역사적으로는 이미 미국인도 겪었고 독일인도 겪었습니다.
And this experience is not unique to Russia. Throughout history, a lot of people and nation states have experienced this. Most recently, Americans have experienced this as well as Germans.
베트남 전쟁 때 미국 군인들의 일부 또는 미국 시민들도 이런 고통을 겪었습니다.
And during the Vietnam War, a lot of American individuals, citizens, experienced some similar guilty feelings.
자기가 소속된 정부가 국가가 이런 부당한 일을 했을 때 시민으로서의 고통이 아주 큽니다.
So, the suffering is large for a citizen that belongs to a nation state that have carried out injustice.
그래서 국적을 버리기도 하고요.
And some people have left and gave up their citizenships.
아니면 정부가 바른 길로 갈 수 있도록 반전 운동을 하기도 하고요.
Or others have engaged in anti-war protests.
그래서 많은 감옥에도 가고 처벌도 받고요.
And they were penalized and punished and went to jail.
미국에서는 그 반전 운동에 많은 사람들이 고통을 겪었습니다.
And many Americans suffered by participating in anti-war protests.
군인들 중에도 총을 버리고 망명한 경우도 있고요.
And there are people who threw down their guns and went somewhere else.
베트남 전쟁은 베트남 주민들의 어떤 저항도 있었지만은 미국 안에서의 반전 운동이 이 전쟁을 종식시키게 한 겁니다.
So there was obviously, kinetic resistance from the Vietnamese themselves during the war. However, the key to America leaving Vietnam was the anti-war protests within the U.S.
러시아 안에도 이 전쟁이 평화롭게 종결되려면 러시아 안의 반전운동에 의해서 러시아 정부가 결단을 내는 것이 가장 좋은 방법입니다.
So the best way for this war to come an end is for the Russian government to listen to the voices of anti-war protests within Russia.
그러나 러시아 정부가 워낙 강압적이기 때문에 저항하기가 쉽지가 않다는 거죠.
But anti-war protests within Russia is going to be very difficult and dangerous because the current Russian government is very repressive.
독일 같은 경우는 일부 저항을 해서 희생을 치렀지만은 도저히 저항이 안 됐기 때문에 많은 사람들이 망명을 했습니다.
So in Germany, some people, there was anti-war protests, but however, they were weak and they could not be sustained. So a lot of people left the country.
결국 스스로 결정을 못하고 히틀러 정부가 패망함으로 해서 그 이후에 지금까지 독일 주민들은 계속 그 지난 과거를 반성하고 있지 않습니까?
So, war in Germany was brought about by outsiders. It did not end from within. And that has, lasting legacy on the German citizens today.
아시아에서도 일본이 이렇게 주변을 침략했기 때문에 일본 사람 중에도 많은 아픔을 겪었습니다. 고통을 겪었습니다.
And during the same era, Japan invaded a lot of neighboring Asian countries, and that has led to a lot of suffering of the Japanese citizens.
그러니까 워낙 강압적이었기 때문에 저항한 사람은 아주 소수였습니다.
But because Japanese government at that time was very repressive and powerful, there were very few who actually managed to protest.
근데 일본 사람들은 대부분 자신과 일본 국가를 동일시했기 때문에 그것에 대한 반성이 국민적으로 부족한 것이 현실입니다.
However, it is true that a lot of Japanese people have identified themselves with the nation state of Japan. So there's not as much kind of inward looking sense, from Japan compared to Germany.
전쟁에 졌을 뿐이다 하는 억울하다는 생각만 있지 이렇게 가해자라는 생각을 하지 못하고 있습니다.
So they believe they just lost the war, but they don't repent from the fact that they were the aggressors.
그러니까 질문자가 선택할 수 있는 것은 첫 번째는 죽을 각오를 하고 돌아가서 저항하는 방법이 있습니다.
So there are a couple of options and choices you need to make. First, a choice that's still open to you is go back to Russia and risk your life and brave, and engage in anti-war protest.
근데 그것을 반드시 그렇게 해야 된다 하는 법은 없습니다.
But I'm not saying that you have to do that.
두 번째는 러시아를 떠나는 길이 있습니다.
And second option is for you to leave Russia.
그 안에서 희생을 무릅쓰고 반대는 못할지언정 그 전쟁에 지지는 못하겠다, 지원은 못하겠다는 뜻이죠.
So you were not able to protest, remain in Russia and protest. However, by leaving, you're voting with your feet and saying you will not be part of this injustice.
2차 세계대전 때 독일로부터 많은 사람들이 독일인들이 이탈해서 외국으로 망명을 했습니다.
During World War II, a lot of Germans voted with their feet and left Germany and sought asylum in the U.S.
이것도 소극적인 저항입니다.
And this is a form of resistance as well.
세 번째는 이제 국외에서 반전 운동을 하는 방법도 있습니다.
And third option is that for you to engage in anti-war protests outside of country.
이것은 이제 그 중간쯤 된다고 말할 수 있죠.
And that's kind of in the middle part, middle way.
그러니까 꼭 반전 운동을 해야만 된다라는 그런 의무감을 가질 필요는 없습니다.
So what I'm saying is that there's no mandatory duty for you to engage in anti-war protests.
거기서 이탈해 온 것만 해도 일단은 그 전쟁을 지지하지 않는 거니까요.
The fact that you actually left Russia is a form of expression of your intent not to support this war.
근데 이 전쟁이 단순히 옳고 그른 러시아가 100% 잘못했다, 이렇게만 또 평가할 수 있는 건 아닙니다.
However, this war cannot be evaluated by saying that Russia is 100% wrong.
러시아가 무력으로 침공한 것은 100% 잘못한 거예요.
But it is 100% wrong for Russia to engage in actual aggression.
현대 사회에서 어떤 경우든 폭력적으로 문제를 푸는 것은 안 된다 하고 국내법이든 국제법으로 이루어져 있습니다.
As both domestic and international law mandates that we should not solve our conflicts and issues through violence.
그러나 미국을 비롯해서 강대국들은 때때로 폭력적으로 문제를 풀려고 한 것이 여러 번 있습니다.
However, strong powers, including the U.S., there have been instances in which they sought to resolve their issues through violence.
또 여러 나라에서는 국내에서 주민들의 저항을 폭력적으로 진압하는 경우도 있지 않습니까?
And in many countries, there are many cases in which governments try to suppress and use violence to suppress their own people.
요즘 미얀마 같은 데가 가장 대표적이지 않습니까?
And these days, that's happening in Myanmar.
그런데 이제 그것이 잘못됐지만은 그러나 이 문제를 해결하려면 서방도 러시아의 어떤 위기의식, 안보에 대한 어떤 어려움을 좀 이해하는 게 필요합니다.
So, the violent aggression is wrong. However, in order to resolve this conflict, I think it is also important for West to understand Russia's fear of its own national security.
근데 이 전쟁은 러시아가 패배해서 끝날 수 있기가 어렵지 않습니까? 강대국이니까.
But because Russia is still a very strong power, it's going to be difficult for this war to be over with a Russian defeat.
그렇다고 러시아가 우크라이나를 점령할 수도 없습니다. 서방이 지원하기 때문에.
But at the same time, because of Western backing, Russia is not going to be able to conquer Ukraine.
이것은 길게 끌고 갈 수밖에 없다.
So it's going to be a long engagement.
그러면 이제 많은 희생이 따를 겁니다.
And that's going to lead to a lot of sacrifice.
러시아와 우크라이나에 많은 군인들이 죽을 거고요.
A lot of soldiers on both sides will die.
우크라이나에 많은 재산이 파괴될 거고요.
And a lot of infrastructures and buildings and cities will get destroyed in Ukraine.
수입 금지나 수출 금지로 인해서 세계인들이 고통을 겪을 겁니다.
Because of sanctions and quarantines, a lot of people throughout the world will suffer.
그러나 지금 세계 지도자들은 이것을 합리적으로 해결하려는 생각이 별로 없는 것 같습니다.
But I don't see the world leaders trying to solve this in a rational manner.
그렇기 때문에 이 질문자가 이것을 너무 자기 문제로 깨닫는 것은 조금 제가 볼 때는 과잉 반응입니다.
So I think you're being overly reactive and trying to identify this problem as an individual.
살아있는 생명은 다 스스로 행복하게 살아갈 권리가 있습니다.
Because every living thing has the right to live happily.
러시아에서 당신이 가졌던 모든 것들은 깨끗이 포기하고 새로운 정착지에서 새로운 출발로 살아가시면 될 것 같습니다.
So I think you should forgo all that life you left behind in Russia and try to start anew.
그리고 형편이 된다면 기본적으로 이 전쟁의 부당함을 본인이 러시아를 대표해서 그래도 나는 러시아인이지만은 이 전쟁에 반대한다는 입장을 가지면 될 것 같습니다.
And if you have the bandwidth or wherewithal, as a Russian, and try to express your resistance, against this war.
그것으로 본인이 마음이 편하지 않다면 조금 더 적극적으로 해외에서 반전 운동을 할 수도 있습니다.
And if that does not give you peace of mind, then you can engage in more, a more aggressive form of anti-war protests abroad.
그러나 이런 운동은 자기 조국에 대해서 그러니까 러시아 사람과 러시아 친구들로부터 이렇게 외면당하는 고통을 감수해야 합니다.
But whatever anti-war protests you engage in, you have to account for the fact that your friends back in Russia, your family and friends might not like your actions.
네, 결론적으로 말씀드리면 좀 편안하게 정착을 했으면 좋겠습니다.
So in essence, I wish you that you could regain a peace of mind and settled in your new place.
Yeah, thank you, Sunim, for Because that's what I do. I now live in Saudi. Also, I don't know for how long because of the visa issues, and I know that Koreans never give refugee status to Russians, so it's kind of just long-lasting phenomenon. But I engage in anti-war protests here. As a pianist, I play concerts on the streets, anti-war banners, and I go on streets on my own, just with all these also anti-war protest things. So, yeah, thank you for your advice.
네, 어떤 반전운동을 하든 생활에 전념하든 어떤 일을 하든 마음의 평화를 가지고 해야 합니다. 그래야 꾸준히 할 수 있습니다.
So whatever anti-war protests you engage in or whatever work you find to sustain yourself, in order to make it sustainable, you have to do it with a peace of mind.
심리가 불안하면 이렇게 화가 나서 폭력적으로 나오기가 쉽거나 안 그러면 지쳐서 포기하기가 쉽습니다.
Because if you try to do this with an unstable psychology, either you become violent and engage in outbursts, or you tend to give up.
이것은 아무에게도 도움이 되지 않습니다.
And that doesn't help anyone.
그러니까 좀 마음을 안정시키고 자신부터 먼저 자세를 가다듬고 다음에 러시아와 세계인들을 위해서 자기가 할 수 있는 범위 안에서 꾸준히 평화를 위한 활동을 해나가시기 바랍니다.
So I want you to focus on yourself first and foremost and kind of calm your minds and regain your peace of mind. Then engage in whatever you can within your abilities on behalf of peace for Russia and for the rest of the world.
여러분들은 북한 이러면 미사일, 핵, 독재 이런 것만 생각하지 않습니까?
So when I mention North Korea, most of the world thinks missiles, nukes, dictators.
그래서 악마화합니다.
And they demonize North Korea because of this.
거기에 2,500만의 우리와 같은 사람이 살고 있다는 것을 잊어버립니다.
And we forget the fact there's 25 million people living who are just like us.
그들의 고통을 외면합니다.
And we do not look at their suffering.
그들은 북한 정부로부터도 피해를 본 사람들이.
These are victims of their own government.
그런데 우리 또한 북한 정부를 핑계로 그들을 외면합니다.
But we use the North Korean government as an excuse to also ostracize them.
이것은 올바른 자세가 아닙니다.
This is not a right attitude.
그런 것처럼 오늘날 우리는 러시아의 이런 부당한 행동 때문에 러시아를 점점 악마화하면서 러시아 사람도 미워하거나 싫어하는 이런 일이 벌어진다면 이것은 잘못된 것입니다.
Therefore, we have to be careful and not to engage in demonization of the Russia and the Russian people because of the actions of its government.
우크라이나는 천사고 러시아는 악마다 이런 이분법적으로 접근하면 안 됩니다.
And we cannot approach this in the binary and saying that everything Ukraine does is angelic and everything Russia does is evil.
여기는 갈등이 생길 만한 여러 이유가 있습니다.
And there were very many different reasons why this conflict happened.
다만 러시아가 군사적으로 선제 공격했다. 이건 명백하게 잘못한 거라는 겁니다.
However, the only thing that is definitely wrong is that Russia engaged in premeditated violent aggression.
네, 오늘 대화를 나누는 중에 자기 소감이나 조언을 하실 분이 있으면 얘기해 주시기 바랍니다.
At this point, I'd like to ask the floor if you have any comments you'd like to add.
My Sunday morning group, and I know that we have talked about him, and we miss you very much, Stanislav, and we support you, and happy to see you this evening. Our hearts are with you.